Michael loved quiet places, and his small lake cabin was the quietest place he had ever known. It was built from old wood, standing strong even after many years, and it sat right by the clear blue lake that reflected the tall green trees around it. For him, it was more than just a cabin, it was a dream he had worked hard for, a piece of peace he could call his own. He had bought the land many years ago, back when no one cared about it. At that time, people thought the land was too far from the city and too empty to be worth anything. But Michael saw something different. He saw beauty in the silence, he saw freedom in the open space, and he saw a chance to create a home that would give him comfort for the rest of his life. With steady savings and patient planning, he finally made the purchase. Every morning at the cabin felt magical to him. The sun would rise slowly, painting the sky with orange and gold. Michael liked to step out on the porch with a warm cup of coffee in his hand, listening to the birds singing in the trees. The lake would be so still that it looked like glass, only moving when a fish jumped or when the wind touched the surface. It was his heaven, far from the noise of busy streets and endless traffic. But Michael's peace was not something everyone understood. Not far from his land, a new neighborhood had been built. It had neat houses, trimmed lawns, and people who loved to make rules for each other. The neighborhood had a homeowners association, and the leader of that group was a woman named Karen. She liked things done her way, and she liked to feel in charge. For a long time, Michael ignored the neighborhood. He lived quietly on his own land and didn't bother anyone. But Karen noticed him, and she didn't like what she saw. One Saturday morning, when the sky was clear and the air smelled fresh from last night's rain, Michael was sitting on his porch. He had just finished reading a book when he noticed someone walking toward him. It was Karen. She wore a sharp expression on her face, and her steps were quick and strong, as if she was marching into battle. "Excuse me," she said loudly, before she even reached his porch. "What do you think you're doing here?" Michael looked at her calmly. "I'm drinking my coffee," he replied, his voice even. "This property belongs to the community," Karen said, her eyes narrowing. "You have no right to stay here. You need to leave immediately." Michael raised an eyebrow. "This is my cabin," he said softly. "And this is my land." Karen shook her head. "No. This whole area is under our homeowners association. We have rules. You're breaking them by being here. If you don't leave, I'll call the police." Michael took a sip of his coffee, unbothered. He had dealt with difficult people before, and he knew the truth was on his side. Still, he didn't enjoy conflict. He tried one more time to explain. "I bought this land years ago. I have all the documents. The neighborhood doesn't own this place." "I do." Karen's face turned red. "Don't lie to me. I know how this works. Outsiders like you try to sneak in and take advantage of our community. Not on my watch." Before Michael could answer, she pulled out her phone. With quick fingers, she dialed 911. Michael watched her, almost amused. He knew what was coming. "Hello," Karen said into the phone, her voice loud and dramatic. "Yes, I need police at the lake cabin near our neighborhood. There's a trespasser here. He refuses to leave." She paused, glaring at Michael. "Yes, he's still here. Please come quickly." When she ended the call, she crossed her arms, looking victorious, as if she had already won. "The police will be here soon," she said. "And when they come, you'll be forced to leave." Michael didn't argue. He simply leaned back on his chair, looking out at the calm water of the lake. "We'll see," he replied quietly. Minutes passed, and the sound of sirens grew louder in the distance. 2 police cars pulled up on the dirt road near his cabin. 2 officers stepped out, adjusting their hats, looking from Karen to Michael. Karen rushed toward them, pointing her finger at Michael. "That's him. He's trespassing. Arrest him right now." The officers looked at Michael, waiting for his side of the story. Michael stood up slowly, walked inside his cabin, and returned with a thick folder. Without a single word of anger, he handed it to the officers. Inside were the deeds, the maps, and the county records, all proving he was the legal owner. The officers studied the papers carefully. Karen watched with crossed arms, her smug expression never leaving her face. She was sure the papers were fake, sure the truth was on her side. But as the officers flipped through page after page, their expressions began to change. Finally, one officer looked up at Michael and asked, "Sir, how much land do you actually own here?" Michael gave a small smile. "More than she thinks." And in that moment, the calm morning by the lake began to turn into something bigger than anyone had expected. The officers stood quietly for a moment, flipping through Michael's folder. Each page carried a clear county stamp, with signatures that could not be denied. The property maps stretched wide, showing the lake, the hills, and the thick woods beyond. One officer tapped the page with his finger, then looked at Karen. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "according to these records, this man isn't trespassing. He's the property owner." Karen's mouth fell open. She let out a laugh, sharp and bitter. "That can't be right. This lake belongs to our community. We built paths around it, we have rules for it, we maintain it. There's no way one man can own all of this." Michael stood calm, his hands resting on the porch rail. "It may surprise you," he said softly, "but I bought this land before your community even existed. When no one else wanted it, I did. And I didn't stop at the cabin. I bought the forest, the hills, and the shoreline. It is all mine, legally." The officers exchanged a look. They had seen strange disputes before, but this one was different. One officer turned to Michael. "Sir, are you saying you own the whole area? Including this lake?" Michael nodded. "Yes. I own every inch from the East Ridge to the western border. It's all recorded in the county office. If you'd like, you can verify it yourselves." Karen's voice grew louder. "This is insane. No one man should own this much land. It belongs to us, to the people, not to him." But the officers were no longer convinced by her words. They handed the folder back to Michael. "We'll double-check at the county records," one officer said politely, "but from what we see here, you have every right to be here. He's not trespassing, ma'am. He's on his own land." Karen's face burned red. She stomped her foot like a child. "This isn't fair. You can't just let him sit here and claim everything. We pay our HOA fees, we take care of this place. And now you're telling me none of that matters." The officer gave a small sigh. "The HOA has rules for your neighborhood. It doesn't control private land outside of it. This cabin, the lake, the woods, they don't belong to your association. They belong to him." Michael remained silent. He didn't want to humiliate Karen, but he also wasn't going to hide the truth. He simply looked out at the calm water, waiting for the storm of words to pass. The neighbors who had gathered began whispering among themselves. Some were shocked, others curious. A few even pulled out their phones to search the county property records, wanting to see for themselves if Michael's claim was true. Finally, the officers turned to leave. "Everything seems clear here," one of them said. "Mr. Michael, thank you for showing us the documents. Ma'am, please avoid making false emergency calls in the future. This could cause real problems if there had been an actual emergency." Karen's eyes widened in disbelief. "You're taking his side? You're just going to walk away?" "We're not taking sides," the officer said firmly. "We're following the law." With that, the officers got back into their cars and drove away, leaving Karen fuming in the dirt road. Michael turned and walked back to his chair on the porch. He sat down, lifted his cup of coffee, and took a slow sip. The moment felt like a quiet victory, though he never liked to think of life in terms of winning or losing. He simply knew the truth had spoken for itself. But Karen was not finished. She stayed there, glaring at him. "You think this is over?" she asked, her voice trembling with frustration. "You may have fooled them with your papers, but I know people. I'll talk to the HOA board. I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of man you are. You can't just sit here, acting like you own everything." Michael looked at her calmly. "I don't act like it," he said gently. "I simply do." Karen spun on her heel and marched back toward the neighborhood, her voice echoing with promises of action. Michael didn't follow her. He knew people like Karen thrived on arguments, and he wasn't going to feed her anger. Instead, he stood, walked to the edge of the lake, and looked across the water. The sun was higher now, glittering on the waves. He remembered the day he signed the papers for this land. He had been younger, with more energy, but the same dream, a dream to protect a piece of nature from being swallowed by endless buildings. Back then, no one had cared about this land. Developers had laughed at him for buying it, calling it useless. But he had seen the truth: one day, people would fight for it. And that day had arrived. By afternoon, Michael noticed more cars driving past his cabin, slowing down as neighbors peeked through their windows. News was spreading fast. Some people wanted to know if it was really true. Others were already forming opinions. Michael wasn't worried. He had lived a quiet life for many years, and he planned to continue it. But he also knew that Karen wouldn't stop. She was the kind of person who turned every disagreement into a battle. For Michael, this was no battle. It was simply life. The land was his, the cabin was his, and the piece of the lake was his. No amount of shouting or HOA rules could change what was already written in law. As evening came, Michael lit a small fire by the lake and cooked a simple meal. The air was cool, and the stars began to shine above. For him, the world was still the same, calm, steady, and beautiful. But in the distance, in the bright neighborhood across the woods, Karen's anger was growing. She was already planning her next move. And Michael knew, sooner or later, she would return. The next morning, the air around the lake felt fresh and cool. Mist floated above the water, and the sound of birds carried softly through the trees. Michael sat on his porch again, holding his coffee, enjoying the stillness. For him, life at the cabin was about moments like this, simple, quiet, and peaceful. But peace didn't last long. By mid-morning, Michael saw a group of people walking toward his cabin. At the front of the group, as expected, was Karen. She wore a determined look on her face, and behind her were several neighbors, some curious, some nervous. They carried papers, clipboards, and phones in their hands. It looked less like a friendly visit and more like a meeting of judges ready to pass a sentence. Michael sighed quietly. He had known this was coming. "Good morning," he said, standing up as they reached the porch. Karen didn't bother with greetings. "We held a community meeting last night," she said sharply. "We discussed you, your so-called ownership, and your behavior. The HOA has rules, and you are breaking them by staying here." Michael folded his arms calmly. "I'm not under your HOA. I own this land. Your rules don't apply here." Karen held up a paper, shaking it in the air. "This is our agreement. Every property around the lake must follow our guidelines. No loud noises, no fires, no outside structures without approval. You can't just sit here and act like you're above everyone else." One of the neighbors spoke softly, almost uncertain. "But Karen, if he owns the land, maybe the rules really don't apply." Karen turned to him, her eyes flashing. "Don't be fooled. People like him come in, ignore the community, and destroy the order we built." She turned back to Michael. "You need to follow the rules, or leave." Michael shook his head slowly. "I respect that your neighborhood has its way of doing things. But this cabin and this land are not part of your neighborhood. I bought it long before your HOA existed. My land stands separate." Some neighbors shifted uncomfortably. A woman in the group raised her hand gently. "Is it true?" she asked Michael. "Do you really own all this, the lake, the woods, the hills?" Michael nodded. "Yes. Every bit of it. I've kept it natural all these years, even when developers wanted to tear it apart. I wanted it safe, for the animals, the water, and for people to enjoy without concrete covering everything." His calm words made several neighbors whisper to each other. They looked at the tall trees, the shining water, and the fresh air around them. For the first time, they thought about how different life might be if the land had been sold to builders. But Karen wasn't moved. She stepped closer, her voice rising. "Don't try to play the hero. If you really cared about the people, you would have given this land to the community, not kept it for yourself. No man should hold this much power." Michael looked at her steadily. "It isn't about power. It's about protection. If I hadn't bought this land, it would be gone by now. Do you really want malls, factories, and traffic here? I saved this place, not for control, but for peace." His words hung in the air, and for a moment, silence covered the group. Some neighbors nodded quietly, realizing what he said was true. Karen, however, refused to let go. She pulled out her phone again, holding it high. "If you won't follow our rules, I'll take this to the county office. I'll make sure they hear about you. I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of man you are." Michael didn't flinch. "Go ahead," he said softly. "They already know. Every record, every document, every map is in their office. You'll find the same truth I've told you today." The group stood uncertain. A few neighbors began to drift back toward the neighborhood, whispering to each other. Some stayed, looking thoughtful, while others looked uncomfortable with Karen's anger. Finally, one man named Robert stepped forward. He was younger than most, with an open face and a steady voice. "Karen, maybe we should listen to him. If what he says is true, then he's the reason this place is still beautiful. Maybe instead of fighting him, we should thank him." Karen's eyes widened in disbelief. "Thank him? For what?" "For sitting here like a king, claiming everything belongs to him." Robert shook his head. "No. For protecting it? My father told me years ago that developers wanted to buy this land and build shopping centers. He said one man stepped in and bought it all, saving it. I didn't believe it then, but now I think he was talking about him. Michael said nothing, but he felt a small warmth in his chest. Someone finally understood. Karen, however, wasn't done. She turned to the remaining neighbors. Don't listen to him. Don't listen to Robert. This man is dangerous. If we let him stay, he'll make his own rules. Today it's the cabin, tomorrow it's something else. We can't give him that much control. But fewer people were nodding now. Doubt had entered their minds. They saw Michael standing calm, never raising his voice, never shouting, while Karen's words grew harsher with each sentence. At last, most of the neighbors turned and left, walking back toward their homes. Robert stayed for a moment, giving Michael a small nod before leaving too. Only Karen remained, her face tight with anger. This isn't over, she hissed. You may have fooled them, but I'll find a way. You don't belong here. Michael looked at her gently. Karen, I belong here more than you know. One day, maybe you'll see that. She spun around and stormed off, disappearing into the trees. Michael stood quietly on his porch, the sound of the lake filling the silence again. He knew she wouldn't stop, but he also knew the truth never changed. The land was his, the peace was his, and no anger could take that away. The county office was busy on Monday morning. People waited in lines with forms in their hands, while clerks typed quickly behind their desks. The air smelled of old paper and fresh ink. Into the setting stormed Karen, her heels clicking loudly on the tiled floor. She held a folder of notes, her face filled with determination. She walked straight to the counter and announced, I'm here to report a problem. There is a man living by the lake who claims he owns the entire county land. I want you to check his records. There's no way it's true. The clerk, a calm woman with glasses, looked up politely. What is his name? Michael, Karen said sharply. He has a cabin near our neighborhood. He thinks he can live there without following any rules. He even says the lake belongs to him. The clerk typed on her computer, her fingers moving smoothly. She searched through the county database, her eyes scanning the screen. After a moment, she looked back at Karen. Yes, I see the records here. Michael does, in fact, own the land. Karen froze. That's impossible. You must be reading it wrong. The clerk turned the monitor slightly so Karen could see. This is the legal record. The land was purchased years ago. The deeds are clear, and the taxes have been paid regularly. It's all valid. Karen's face turned red. She leaned closer. You mean to tell me one man owns the lake, the hills, the woods, everything? Yes, the clerk said simply. It's unusual, but it's legal. Karen pressed her lips together. She wasn't ready to give up. Well, he shouldn't own it. He doesn't deserve it. Someone needs to do something. The clerk adjusted her glasses. Ma'am, unless there is fraud, there is nothing to be done. Ownership is decided by law, not by opinion. If you want, you can file a complaint, but the documents are very strong. Karen snatched a complaint form from the counter, her hands shaking with anger. Fine. Then I'll file it. I won't let him sit there like a king, pretending he's better than everyone else. Meanwhile, back at the cabin, Michael was cutting firewood by the shed. His axe rose and fell in a steady rhythm. Each strike echoed in the still air, and chips of wood flew to the ground. He enjoyed the work, it kept him strong and gave him time to think. He knew Karen wouldn't stop at her words. People like her needed battles to feel important. He expected she would go to the county office. He expected she would file papers. None of it worried him. He had nothing to hide. Later that afternoon, Robert came by. He carried a basket with bread and apples, his way of showing kindness. Michael set down his axe and welcomed him with a nod. "I heard Karen went to the county office today," Robert said. Michael smiled faintly. "I expected it. They say she made a scene in front of everyone," Robert continued. "But the clerk confirmed everything you told us. People are starting to talk. Some are angry at Karen now, not at you. They say she embarrassed the whole neighborhood." Michael sat on a wooden bench by the porch, motioning for Robert to join him. "Truth has a way of speaking for itself," he said gently. Robert looked out at the lake. "The water sparkled under the afternoon sunday. "I've lived here for years," he said. "But I never knew who saved this place. Now I realize it was you. My father used to take me fishing here when I was a boy. He always said this land was special, untouched. Now I understand why. You protected it?" Michael didn't answer right away. He stared at the lake, remembering the day he signed the deed. It hadn't been about pride or wealth. It had been about promise. He had promised himself that the land would stay pure, that no machines would break the silence, no cement would bury the earth. "It wasn't just for me," Michael said finally. "It was for everyone. Even if they don't see it yet." Robert nodded. "Some of us see it now. And we're on your side." The next day, Karen's complaint reached the county office. The officials reviewed it carefully, but the result was always the same. The ownership stood. Michael's name was written across the records, and no argument could erase it. The office sent Karen a letter, explaining the decision. She read it late at night in her kitchen, her hands trembling with frustration. She tore the letter in half, then in half again, her anger burning hotter. "This isn't over," she muttered to herself. "If the law won't stop him, I'll find another way." Back at the lake, Michael sat by the fire pit as the stars came out. The air was cool, and the flames glowed softly against the dark. He felt the quiet strength of the land around him. The trees, the water, the earth all steady, all his responsibility. He knew Karen would return with more schemes. He knew more storms were coming. But he also knew something else: he had lived through storms before. And no storm had ever broken him. For Michael, the land was not just property. It was a promise, a legacy, a truth that could not be shaken by anger or pride. He lifted his eyes to the sky, watching the stars shine bright. In their silent light, he felt the peace that no argument could take away. A few days after Karen's failed attempt at the county office, she decided to take a different approach. If the law couldn't stop Michael, she thought, maybe public pressure could. She organized a meeting at the community hall, inviting neighbors, friends, and anyone who would listen to her complaints. Flyers were posted on doors, messages were sent in group chats, and soon the hall was crowded with familiar faces. Michael had no plans to attend. He had never liked crowds, especially not ones filled with angry people. But word of the meeting reached Robert, who had grown to respect Michael for his quiet strength and honesty. He knocked on Michael's door that morning, holding a small notebook. "You should go," Robert said simply. "People need to hear your side, not just hers." Otherwise, they might believe her stories. Michael paused, thinking. He didn't like arguments, but he also knew that silence could be misunderstood. Finally, he nodded. All right. I'll go. But I'll speak calmly. No shouting, no anger. Just the truth. The hall was loud when Michael arrived. Karen was already at the front, standing behind a podium, waving her arms and speaking with fire. This man thinks he can own everything. The lake, the woods, the hills, he's breaking our rules, and he doesn't care about anyone but himself. Some people murmured in agreement, while others looked uncertain. Michael stepped forward quietly, placing his folder on the table. His calm presence contrasted sharply with Karen's loud voice. I'm Michael, he began, his voice steady. I know there are questions about the land, about my cabin, and about what I own. Let me explain. He paused, looking around the room. Years ago, I bought this land when no one wanted it. Developers laughed at me for investing in it. But I didn't buy it for profit, and I didn't buy it to control anyone. I bought it to protect it. The room grew quieter. People leaned forward, listening. I have kept the land natural, Michael continued. The lake, the hills, and the forests are untouched. Animals live here safely. The water stays clean. If I hadn't bought it, this place would have been covered with buildings and roads. I didn't do it for myself. I did it so everyone could enjoy it, even if they didn't realize it at the time. Some neighbors nodded slowly. A few whispered to each other, realizing that Michael's quiet life had saved something they all loved. Karen interrupted, her voice sharp. That's not true. He's selfish. He owns all this and doesn't let anyone make decisions. That's not fair. Michael didn't raise his voice. He simply said, I'm not trying to take decisions away from anyone. I'm trying to protect what is already here. Think about what would happen if developers had bought this land instead. Would you want malls, parking lots, and noise replacing the lake? The room grew even quieter. People looked out the windows, thinking about the clear water and tall trees surrounding them. They thought about the lake where their children fished, the woods where they hiked, and the fresh air they breathed. Slowly, the truth began to sink in. Robert, sitting near the back, whispered to his neighbor, he really saved this place. I can't believe we didn't know before. Karen's frustration grew. She waved her hands and shouted, you're all being fooled. He's only thinking about himself. But fewer people listened. Some of Karen's supporters shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They had come ready to argue, but Michael's words were calm, clear, and true. Michael walked to a map he had brought with him. He pointed to the lake, the hills, and the forests. Every part of this land is protected because I bought it. I pay the taxes. I maintain it. I didn't do it for recognition, and I don't need anyone's approval. I did it so it could stay safe, so future generations could enjoy the beauty that we have today. The room remained quiet. A few neighbors began clapping softly, then others joined in. Even some of Karen's supporters lowered their heads, realizing she had been wrong to spread anger and fear. Karen's face turned red, but she found no words. She had expected an argument, a fight, maybe support from the crowd, but instead, she faced calm truth, respect, and growing admiration for Michael. By the end of the meeting, most of the crowd was on Michael's side. They thanked him quietly, shook his hand, and expressed their appreciation. Karen left in anger, her voice muttering complaints as she walked out the door. Michael stayed a moment longer, looking around the hall. He didn't enjoy attention, but he understood its importance. People needed to see what he had done, to understand the quiet work behind the peace they enjoyed. Later that day, Michael returned to the lake. The water reflected the evening sun, orange and gold. He breathed deeply, feeling the calm of the land he had protected. The fight with Karen was not over, he knew, but for now, the truth had found its place. People understood. They respected the land, and in turn, they respected him. Sitting by the fire that night, Michael thought about the future. The lake would remain clear. The trees would remain tall. And the quiet work of protecting what was valuable would continue, no matter how many storms came from people like Karen. For Michael, this was enough. The days after the community hall meeting were quiet, but not for Karen. She sat at her kitchen table, fuming, going over every detail in her mind. "This isn't fair," she muttered to herself. "He's taking over everything, and no one sees the danger. I have to do something else." But even as she planned, more neighbors began to talk about Michael's deeds. Small conversations started near fences, in local shops, and on porches. "Did you hear what he said at the meeting?" some asked. "He saved this place. Without him, the lake would be full of concrete." Others nodded, sharing stories of fishing trips, hikes, and summer picnics, all protected because Michael had bought the land. Michael, meanwhile, kept his routine. He chopped wood in the mornings, fished in the afternoons, and watched the sun set over the lake in the evenings. He didn't care about fame or recognition, but he noticed the quiet respect growing among those who once doubted him. One afternoon, Robert came by with a few more neighbors. "Michael," he said, "people are finally starting to understand. They see that Karen has been wrong, and that you've done something incredible. Some of us want to help you maintain the land." Michael smiled softly. "I never wanted attention. I just wanted the land to be safe. But help is always welcome." They spent the afternoon walking along the shoreline, picking up small debris and making sure paths were clear. It felt peaceful, productive, and shared. For Michael, it was a reminder of why he had fought for this land in the first place. Karen, however, refused to give up. She went to the HOA board again, insisting they take stronger action. "He's flaunting the rules. We need to stop him," she said, her voice sharp. But the board members were cautious. They had seen the county records, listened to Michael at the meeting, and watched neighbors' reactions. They explained, gently but firmly, that the HOA had no legal authority over his property. Karen stormed out, muttering under her breath. She even tried local newspapers, hoping to turn public opinion against Michael. But reporters found the truth in the documents he had provided. Articles praised his efforts, describing him as a quiet man who had protected nature and the lake from development. Karen's attempts only highlighted Michael's honesty and commitment. One evening, Michael noticed Karen walking along the dirt road near his cabin, staring at the lake. He didn't approach her. Instead, he continued tending his fire pit, the soft crackle of flames filling the air. Karen stopped and called out, her voice trembling slightly. "Why do you do it? Why do you keep all this land for yourself?" Michael looked up calmly. "It's not about myself. It's about keeping this place natural, clean, and safe. If I didn't care, someone else would have bought it for profit, and this beauty would be gone." Karen said nothing for a long moment. The sun reflected off the lake, and she could see the truth in his eyes. She might not like him, but she could not deny that the land was safe, that it was beautiful, and that he had done all of this quietly, without asking anyone for thanks. Meanwhile, word of Michael's deeds reached the county officials again. They visited the lake to see for themselves. One official, a kind man named Mr. Anderson, walked along the water and looked at the trees, the hills, and the cabin. "This is remarkable," he said. "You've preserved it better than we could have imagined. The people here are lucky." Michael shrugged. "I just wanted to do the right thing." Mr. Anderson nodded. "Sometimes, the right thing doesn't get noticed immediately. But it always matters. What you've done will benefit generations." By the end of the week, more neighbors began visiting the cabin. Some brought food, others offered to help with maintenance. Children played near the lake under careful watch, while adults admired the beauty of the land. Michael never demanded their gratitude. He simply worked alongside them, chopping wood, clearing paths, and keeping the lake clean. Karen continued to linger at the edges of the neighborhood, frustrated and angry, but she could not ignore the growing admiration for Michael. The neighbors who once listened only to her now looked to him as the quiet protector of the land. Even some of her supporters quietly admitted to themselves that he had done more good than anyone had realized. That night, as Michael sat by his fire, the stars reflecting in the water, he felt a deep sense of calm. The land was safe. The neighbors were beginning to understand. Karen's anger, no matter how loud, could not change what was true. And in that silence, with the soft crackle of flames and the gentle lapping of water against the shore, Michael understood something important. Real strength was not about shouting or demanding power. It was about doing what was right, even when no one noticed, even when people fought against you. For Michael, the lake, the hills, and the forests were more than land. They were a promise he had made long ago, and now, slowly, everyone was beginning to see the value of that promise. The next morning, Michael woke to the sound of birds singing across the lake. The water was calm, reflecting the soft light of the rising sun. He stepped onto the porch with a cup of coffee, as he had done every day for years, and looked at the peaceful scene. For a moment, he allowed himself to simply enjoy the quiet, the same quiet he had fought so hard to protect. Word had spread quickly. Many neighbors had started to accept the truth about Michael and his land. They came by with small gifts of food, offered help with chores, or simply stopped to say thank you. People he had never spoken to before were now treating him with quiet respect. Even Robert, who had been one of the first to support him publicly, brought friends to show appreciation. Karen, however, had not given up. She paced in her neighborhood, trying to convince anyone who would listen that Michael was wrong. But now, more and more neighbors quietly ignored her. Some even told her that she was mistaken, that Michael had only saved the land for everyone's benefit. Her words no longer carried the weight they once had. By mid-morning, Michael received a knock on the cabin door. He opened it to find a small group of neighbors, including Robert, and a few families he had seen enjoying the lake. They smiled, carrying baskets of apples, bread, and fresh vegetables. "Michael," Robert said, "we want to help you celebrate. Not just for saving the land, but for showing us all what caring really means." Michael shook his head softly. "I don't need a celebration. I only wanted the land to stay natural. That's the reward for me." The neighbors insisted, and so they gathered near the edge of the lake. They set up a small picnic, simple and heartfelt, with children laughing and families sitting quietly, enjoying the scenery. Michael joined them, quietly grateful for their company. The fire crackled nearby, and the water reflected the sunlight like a sheet of glass. Even Karen appeared, though reluctantly. She stayed at the edge of the gathering, arms crossed, her face tight with frustration. She tried to protest, but the neighbors simply ignored her. Michael noticed her but said nothing. There was no need to fight anymore. The truth and the respect of the community spoke louder than any argument she could make. One of the older neighbors, a woman named Helen, spoke to the group. For years, we didn't know what we had here. But now, we see it. Michael protected this lake, these trees, and these hills for all of us. He deserves our thanks, and our respect. Others nodded in agreement. Children ran to the water's edge, skipping stones across the surface. The sunlight glimmered on the waves, and laughter filled the air. Even Karen had to look away, realizing she could not change what had happened. Michael finally spoke, his voice calm and steady. I didn't do this for recognition. I did it because it was the right thing. I wanted the land to remain beautiful, safe, and peaceful. I hoped that one day, people would understand why it mattered. And now, you do. Robert smiled. We understand, Michael. More than ever. You've done something most of us could never do. Karen left quietly, her anger softened slightly, replaced with grudging acceptance. She realized that no complaint, no argument, and no meeting could undo what Michael had done. His dedication had earned the trust and respect of the people, and she could not take that away. As the day went on, Michael walked along the shoreline. He watched families enjoying the lake, children skipping stones, and birds flying low across the water. He thought about the years he had spent working quietly, saving the land from developers who only saw money. The quiet efforts, the patience, the long days of work, all of it had led to this moment. He paused and looked at the hills in the distance, tall and green. The forest stretched far beyond the lake, untouched and serene. He realized that the peace he had fought for was no longer just his, it belonged to everyone who cared about it, and that gave him a deep sense of satisfaction. As evening came, Michael sat by the fire pit for the last time that day, watching the flames dance and listening to the gentle lapping of water against the shore. The stars appeared above, mirrored in the lake below. For the first time in years, he felt completely at ease. He knew Karen might continue to complain, but it didn't matter. The truth could not be undone. The land was protected, the neighbors understood, and the lake remained as pure as it had been when he first bought the cabin. His promise to the land was kept. And in that quiet night, surrounded by the soft sounds of nature, Michael realized something important. Sometimes, doing the right thing quietly, without seeking recognition, can create the strongest kind of respect. It lasts far longer than anger, noise, or complaints. The lake reflected the moonlight, shimmering gently, and Michael smiled softly. The cabin, the water, the hills, and the forests all were safe. He had fulfilled his promise, and the peace he had worked for so long had finally arrived. Michael leaned back, taking a deep breath of the crisp night air. He knew the story of the lake, the cabin, and the quiet man who protected it would be remembered, not because he demanded it, but because he lived it every day. And for the first time, he felt a full, quiet happiness, knowing the land, and everyone who loved it, would be safe for years to come.